Hi folks, Aurini here. Hope that wherever you are, you're staying warm and that things are safe for you. Now this is the first in a series of videos I'm going to be doing on psychology. With this first one, I'm exploring the question of whether or not psychology is itself a science. Now right off the bat, I'm not going to be playing around with solipsism or postmodernism or any other ideations which reject an abstract reality around us. Basically, they ask, can you trust your own eyes? Well, the answer's pretty well known to all of us. You can within certain limits. If you just had 2 cups of coffee, it's the middle of the day and you see a UFO land, good chance there's really a UFO landing if you've never had a psychotic episode before. If you start seeing pink elephants after a couple of bottles of gin, next morning you're probably going to discount that information. Another example of this, the betta fish, commonly called the Japanese fighting fish. If you show it a reflection of itself, it will start doing its war dance. It'll get aggressive and all angry. And what's happening, it's a breakdown in the operating system. It's just seeing a reflection, but its mind is telling it that there's another betta fish there. So obviously our own senses fall to the same type of problems. We have flaws in our operating system. Optical illusions are a perfect example of this. Images that our eyes weren't designed to see, and so we see something other than just lines on a page. So that's all I'm going to say about solipsism, is that, you know what, you can know them by their works. The postmodernists, those abstract literary critics, what have they ever accomplished? What have they contributed to the world compared to the scientists, the engineers, people that live in the real world and acknowledge that it actually exists? So with that said, what's the best way of finding out about the real world? For most of the time that our species has been around, we've been dominated by religion, by superstition. It seems to boil down to the fact that we're a storytelling species. Partly this is a pro-survival trait. If you see some bushes moving and you assume it's a tiger behind the bushes, that caveman's going to live, while the one that assumes it's just nothing or just random elements or whatever, that one isn't going to live long enough to have babies of their own. And so when we see things that are hard to explain, thunderstorms, tsunamis, we naturally start assigning meaningful elements to them. Now this is a flaw in our operating system, and so it takes a long time to develop better ways of reasoning. Now personally, I'm a Bayesian rationalist, which is a more efficient way of arriving at correct conclusions than the scientific method. Now what do I mean by this? I'm certainly not saying the scientific method should be thrown out. I'll give you an example. Going back to the UFO thing, let's say that I meet a bunch of people that believe in UFOs and that little gray aliens are coming down to Earth, or lizard people are running the government, or what have you. Now using Bayesian rationality, I'm going to look at these people and I'm going to say, well, their hair is unkempt. Each single one of them is describing a different alien. This conflicts with other information I have. What method could these aliens possibly travel through to Earth without taking hundreds of years? So on and so forth. Right off the bat, their claim of aliens will slightly increase the probability in my mind that aliens are visiting Earth, but compared to the mountain of evidence I have on the other side, it's not going to be enough for me to remotely change my position on the topic. Now science, on the other hand, if it approached this question, it has to investigate it. The scientist himself might ignore it, but that's not being scientific. The scientific method, it needs to design an experiment and actually spend the energy investigating it before it can come to a conclusion and have that conclusion be part of science. And now obviously there are so many claims that just aren't worth the time investigating. I don't spend my time reading creationist websites because my priors going into it already tell me more than enough information to discount everything on those websites. Now, and also, the scientific method doesn't capture creativity. When Einstein created his theory of relativity, he was not being scientific, he was being creative. The science comes when he actually tests that theory, or when other people tested that theory. And Einstein rather famously said that if the experiment proved relativity false, that would mean the experiment was false, not relativity. And there's some complex reasons for that. The fact that he could pick out relativity in all of idea space, and he could narrow on in that one idea and say, yes, this is the idea, that already sets it as extremely, extremely probable. And it would have been more likely that the experiment went false. But that said, science is an extremely useful tool. What science does is it basically idiot-proofs the system. What do I mean by this? Well, the problem throughout history is that the vast majority of our priors have been absolute nonsense. I mean, even some of the deepest thinkers. Go back to Plato and try reading some of his works. Brilliant ideas, but his priors that he goes into it are absolutely asinine, and he wasn't using a scientific method. So what the scientific method boils down to, and this is, of course, you learned this in school, but they certainly didn't teach it very well to me. I had to learn it for myself all over again as an adult, is that you start off with your idea. For instance, your car is making a clunking noise, and your hypothesis could be that it needs an oil change. So the hypothesis, what people have done throughout history before this was they try and seek information confirming the hypothesis. And this is where the scientific method becomes unique. This is where it starts idiot-proofing. You see, early as a Bayesian, I was looking at those UFO cultists, and I just discount everything they said, because my prior says that anybody dressed like a lunatic like this probably isn't going to have an idea worth sharing. But scientific method says that, no, I can't seek confirmatory evidence. What I have to do is try and disprove it. So my car's clunking. I think it's the oil. What do? Do I do an oil change right away? And then, no, of course not. What I do is I go and I check the dipstick to see if the oil level is correct, to see if the oil is black. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to disprove my theory. I'm trying to find information that would prove me wrong. And if I can, obviously the oil check is a rather simple thing, but if I can check a number of different mechanisms on the car, let's say maybe I thought it was a transmission problem, which would get a little bit weirder. So I check a whole bunch of things that would be false if it weren't the transmission, but every single one of them comes up as true. At that point, I confidently move ahead and replace the transmission. So that's a scientific method in a nutshell. Hypothesis, experimentation, conclusion. Except what they don't teach in school is that the experiment is supposed to try and disprove the hypothesis. If you try and prove the hypothesis, well, you know what? There's going to be 50 other hypotheses that evidence could support as well. And you're not going to notice this. But if you try and disprove the hypothesis, you will very rapidly move closer to the truth. So, all right, with that all established, let's get to psychology. Now, psychology claims to be a science. It's recognized by law as having the authority of science. A psychologist can come into a courtroom and make statements at the witness stand, and they're considered facts. Now compare this to, say, fingerprint technology. With fingerprint technology, it's a proven fact that fingerprints are extremely unique, that they can be accurately read off of, a glass that you touched or a doorknob, And there's a direct causal relationship. There's a theory about how it works. It's the oil on your skin producing the patterns on the glass. It's fully understood, inside and out. And it was discovered through, somebody noticed it. They noticed that people left fingerprints and they were different. And they said, well, let's test this. And so they got 100 people and said, hey, all these people have different fingerprints. And they tried 1,000, and there's mountains of evidence backing it up. They tried to disprove it. Well, I hope they tried to disprove it. Regardless, at this point, if it were a false idea, we would have disproved it by now. Psychologists, on the other hand, psychology starts with a premise. You can go back to Freud that thinks everybody has an oral fixation or an anal fixation, and he broke everything down into this dichotomy. He thought that every son wanted to rape their mother, and every daughter wanted to seduce her mother. And he applied this to everybody. Modern psychology has moved away from Freud, who, of course, never tested his ideas. Any tests he performed, he just used to expand his ideas. Modern psychology, what it has done, it has defined a number of mental disorders. And then it lists criteria for those mental disorders. Now, there's two problems with this. The first problem is that we don't know what these mental disorders are. For instance, take the thimerosal and autism debate. Do flu vaccines cause autism? Now the correct answer to this is shut the fuck up. But if we're going to explore it a little bit more deeply, we know what thimerosal is, we know what the flu vaccine is, and we can study what it does in the body. Right? For the record, all the thimerosal flushes the body after 48 hours or something. It's none left behind. And they've stopped using it in vaccines. So even if it were bad, you can safely vaccinate your kids. Do it. It's a good idea. But what is autism? It's kind of like asking, what is pornography? I know it when I see it. If you meet somebody with autism, you can generally tell. But what about the gray areas? What about people that are half autistic? Where's the line? Or better yet, is all autism the same thing? If I meet a child that can't learn mathematics and is always running around in circles, does he have autism, or is he mentally retarded? What's the mechanism behind it? We don't know what the mechanism is behind autism. Neurology, which is actually a science, has bit by bit been taking over psychology when it actually discovers causal mechanisms for things. For instance, fetal alcohol syndrome. That is a distinct condition that you can point towards. Autism, we don't know what it is. We just know it's a list of behavioral traits. And of course, each one of those behavioral traits is not defined in a mathematical sense. Robert Heinlein once said, if you can't describe it in numbers, it's just an opinion. And so this is part of the problem. Now, so far I've just been talking. It'd probably be a good idea if I actually got some facts behind this. So here's a perfect example. The MMPI-2 Item Content Analysis Classification Criteria is it's a psychological evaluation instrument for determining personality disorders. It's 567 yes or no questions. And so here are a few examples I'm going to give you. And what's really striking about these, I'm not going to put in all the details, all the information. Feel free to research it yourself. But most of these questions, whether you answer yes or no to them, it's indicative of some sort of mental disorder. Question number 32. I have had very peculiar and strange experiences. Well, define for me exactly what a peculiar or strange experience is. I was once working at Subway, the sandwich shop, and a couple of street kids had the door open, and this pigeon walked into the store and walked around for about 5 minutes before walking back out, and then it flew away. That was a strange experience. Does that qualify? Does that indicate a mental disorder on my part? I don't know. Question 37. At times, I feel like smashing things. Once again, what sort of things? Are we talking about smashing icicles off of a house, smashing a TV screen? How often? Why? These questions aren't asked. Question 105. In school, I was sometimes sent to the principal for bad behavior. Now, if you're male and you answer no to this question, it's indicative that you might have a gender identity disorder. But if you answer yes to this question, it might indicate psychopathy. Oh, jeez. You know what? These questions honestly remind me of this. One time I had a political surveyist phone me up, and they were asking me a bunch of questions like, how concerned am I about the police department? And I couldn't answer that question. I'm very concerned about it, but does concerned mean I want them to get more taxpayer dollars? Because I certainly don't. How will they interpret that? If I'm not concerned, does that mean I think the police are doing a bang-up job? Because I don't. Except they couldn't explain the question, and it was loaded in such a way that they could spin it however they wanted. Anyway, going on with these psychology questions. I feel that I've often been punished without cause. Well, who doesn't feel that way? I mean, look at the weather we're getting in the northern hemisphere right now. It's currently minus 24 outside and unpleasant as all get out. I feel like I'm being punished. Does that count? 158. It makes me uncomfortable to put on a stunt at a party, even when others are doing the same things. Once again, what does this even mean? Sometimes I feel uncomfortable, sometimes I don't. It's going to depend on my mood, right? 160. I liked school. Well, you know what? Personally, I had some great teachers. Some of my classes, I actually learned some new things, and I loved learning things. You know what? I also got picked on a lot. There's the eternal teenage awkwardness with sex. So on and so forth. You ask me on Tuesday if I like school, I'll say yes. Ask me on Wednesday, I'll say no. It all depends on the time of day and the context. And 316. I have strange and peculiar thoughts. All I can see this question indicating is whether the person talking to the therapist is looking for some specific sort of help or not. And if the person looking for help, if they're looking for help already, they've already decided what sort of condition they have. And they've probably read a few things on the internet about it, and so, of course, they're going to start manifesting the signs of this condition. Is this indicative of an underlying neurological condition? If so, which neurological condition? Now, you're noticing that most of these questions, they feel like something that you'd read in a horoscope, or that a tarot card reader, the sort of questions they'd be asking you. And it's all about the feeling behind the questions. It's bloody reading entrails is what it is. These are not specific questions. They're vague, and you know what? Here's a good practice for you. Find one of those online personality exams. You know, they tell you if you're introverted, extroverted, whatever. And take it, do the exam, bookmark the URL, and copy the results down into a text file. A month later, go take the test again and see if you get the same result. You probably won't, because all it's measuring is how you're feeling. For the most part, all it's measuring is how you're feeling at that moment while you're taking the test. If you just got laid the night before, you'll probably be really extroverted. If you're struggling financially the next month, then it'll say that you suffer from depression, which is nonsense, of course. But it gets even worse. Many of these questions come in paired bundles where it's supposed to trick you into contradicting yourself to discover if you're trying to beat this. there's some sort of complex reason behind it, but looking at these questions, it's obviously bullshit. So here we have question 48. Most any time, I would rather sit and daydream than do anything else. And question 184. I dream very little. Now, if you answer true to the first and false to the second, they say that you're lying. Except daydreams are not the same thing as dreams. Maybe I sleep like a log, but I like to imagine things during the day. Perfectly valid answer. But they're going to interpret that as you trying to do whatever, having this mental disorder. 556, I worry a great deal over money. 560, I'm satisfied with the amount of money I make. Now, especially lately, and what's happening with the economy right now, obviously those two are not the same thing. You could be very happy with how much money you're making, but be scared shitless about what's happening with the economy. Where will he be in 6 months, in 5 years? They're not the same thing, but they're considered the same thing. And finally, I'm not going to bore you, 265, I'm likely not to speak to people until they speak to me. And 360, I do not mind meeting strangers. Once again, these are not about the same things. Maybe you've met a lot of good strangers. Maybe you're comfortable talking to people, but you just don't initiate conversation. I tend not to talk to people in the elevator, but if they talk to me, I'll say hello back to them. Got no problem with that. But I'm usually too busy thinking about something. And yet they're deriving meaning out of all these questions. This is problematic. Remember what I said earlier about science seeks to disprove itself. Well, the problem, if you ever go in for a psychological survey, it's all going to be, what does the tester want to be true? Now, let's say you join the military and you take their psychological survey. They're really just testing if you're a complete lunatic or not. So as long as they're going to be trying to make you sane because they want you to join the army. Now, you go in for any reason and you get psychologically evaluated. The tester has already decided whether or not you're insane. And now they're just looking for evidence to cherry pick. See, they don't come into it saying, I suspect this person has bipolar disorder. I'm going to administer this test and see if the results support my hypothesis or deny my hypothesis. No, that's not what they're going to do. Is they come into the whole thing and they're like, you're crazy. How are you crazy? And then after the test, they collate the results. And then they said, oh, this is how you're crazy. This is the disorder that you have. This is not the scientific method. However, it is the method used by psychology, and it's the exact same method used by drug companies. That's why SSRIs, they seem to do something. What do? We don't know. But a test said they were good for bipolar. We'll use them for bipolar. Another test says they're not good for bipolar. And when they accidentally do collect evidence, testing these things, because they don't actually like to test the basic assumptions. But when they do, it ends up going closer and closer to a placebo effect. That all the drug is doing is, I can feel that I'm taking the drug, because it makes my nose tingle or whatever it is, and so I feel myself getting better. The drug's not doing anything. It could be a sugar pill, but because you believe in medication, it starts working for you. The real problem with all of this is that the psychologists know as much about human nature as a priest, and a hell of a lot less than a good novelist. And yet we've elevated these people to positions of respect because they put on the outfit of science. They run mock experiments. But this is not real science. All of the premises that they've started off with are absolute bunk. They have never tested these premises. They have never asked, is schizophrenia and schizotypal personality disorder, is there a related causal mechanism? No, they don't test for that. They don't want to know. They want to have those two conditions. Homosexuality. Is it a psychological disorder? Well, it was, and now it isn't. Not for any good reason. We didn't suddenly discover that, oh wait, homosexuality is... No. It just became non-politic to call it a mental disorder. And it wasn't the psychologists that discovered what caused homosexuality, by which I'm speaking about there seems to be some genetic predisposition to it. The one theory I've read, the one hypothesis, states that, for instance, a gay man is likely to have sisters that are more fertile than normal. So this would suggest that this couple tends to produce extremely feminine children, and this might lead the male child to being homosexual. That's one hypothesis. It sounds plausible to me because obviously there must be a positive selection effect for homosexuality. It's obvious if you have gay friends or lesbian friends that they do seem to have distinct body types, which is probably nature and not nurture, but anyway. But yeah, it was not psychology that discovered this and then took it off the books. It was after they took it off the books, biology, a real science, discovered it. Now, one final point. There was an excellent article by The Last Psychiatrist about the decline effect. And this is just the nail in the coffin. It's by John Lehrer, not sure how to pronounce that. And he used to be a scientist, but now he works for The New Yorker. And one thing they've been picking out in science, which undermines the scientific method, is the decline effect. And that's where they start with one theory that, the one example given in the article, I'll link it at the bottom, is that females prefer symmetrical males. But over time, this effect seems to disappear. Now, this is not publication bias. Publication bias is where only positive effects get published, and so if 100 studies are done, 99 prove nothing. One finds a result, that one gets published. No. These particular studies were wide-ranging enough and detailed enough that there was definitely an effect. So what's the problem? Well, the studies he's talking about, going back to the females, the first study was on barn swallows. Then there was a different study on gnats. And then there's a different study on And so they took these studies and said that, well, females like symmetry in their mates. Except that's not what they were studying. They were studying these what did I say, barn owls, whatever. These birds, these gnats, in this environment, in this year, in this locale, like this. They did not do a test to see if human females like that. And so that's a decline. The false conclusion declined, not the actual study. The actual study is still true. It just didn't examine what it claimed to examine. And this is the heart of psychology. They find a correlation between a poorly worded question and a behavior type. And then they expand that to make a sweeping, generalized statement about humanity that is not remotely justified. And the sweeping statement they make, they never test that. They only do side tests designed to support it. Psychology is not a science. These people are dangerous because of the fact that they've been granted access to the title of scientist and the powers of a scientist in society, powers they don't deserve and have not earned. And as such, we have this cast of Roman priest examining entrails, directing policy, directing treatment of human beings, deciding who gets to be a free person and who gets locked up in a cage. Stay away from psychologists, people, and keep yourself safe. Aurini out.